Okay, my name is Chris Henniger, and I'm the Education and Mental Health Manager at Fremont County Head Start. Our webinar today is going to be talking about institutionalizing data collection in the classroom and program, and we're going to go ahead and get started. As Johanna said, I did try to make this as interactive as possible. I know we have a wealth of knowledge out there, so please feel free to jump in and to add anything as you'd like. So this is our objectives. We're going to be talking a little bit about our feelings about data. I know we all have some strong feelings. What data we're going to be collecting, why we collect data, how we collect data, and then what are we going to use that information for. Hey, Johanna. So do these pictures look familiar? Most of the time when we talk about data or mention data, this is kind of the look that I get, is that scared, frightened, feeling like you're buried under a pile of papers kind of look, and especially when we hear a definition that's written like this, so that data is the representation of concepts or other entities fixed in or on a medium in a form suitable for communication, interpretation, or processing by human beings or automated systems. Wow. Luckily for us, we will not be using that definition today. So let's turn the slide. What we are going to be looking at is coming to peace with data. So really the two reasons why we need data is for information and for knowledge. But first let's start a little bit by defining those three words in the way that we're going to use them today. Sometimes we use data and information interchangeably, and really they're two different concepts or two different words. So we're going to define data today as simply the facts that we're collecting. That's all we want to look at. And information as the grouping of the facts or aggregating this data, as so many people like to say. That's kind of that new key term that's out there lately, is aggregation. And then lastly, we're going to look at knowledge as the grouping of information to form a picture of where we are and also where we want to go. Hey, Johanna. So this is just another way to take a look at it. Sometimes the data is in our programs is really separated and disconnected. So that's kind of what it looks like right there above that funnel, where we've got all these separate pieces and all of these facts that are out there. And what we really want to do is put all those facts together, all of that, and turn it into in an organized fashion, turn it into information that is useful to us and in an organized way. And that's going to lead to that knowledge base. So we're really going to be looking at getting to that goal-setting piece and how to create a culture of data-driven decision-making within our programs. Hey, Johanna. So the first piece we're going to look at is really what data we're collecting. So if you can take a look at that handout that I sent you, the data collection plan, we're going to take a look at that very first column. So where it says classroom data, child data, we're going to look at that first section right there. And so there's lots of things in our programs that are being collected. We're collecting stuff from classrooms, from families, from children, program level, from our community, from our leadership. And sometimes we get into that silo effect where we're not quite sure what exactly is being collected throughout our entire program. And this collection plan is just an example. You can kind of tweak it as you need it, is a way to put down on paper what is being collected in each area. So this is really a tool to be used, sitting down with a leadership team and taking piece by piece and saying, okay, let's look at classroom data. What are we currently collecting? And writing that down. And going through every piece. Or what are we collecting on individual children? What are we collecting as far as community and family data? Hey, Johanna. So here's just some examples of things we can, that we probably are currently collecting. And this is where I want to get some information from you guys too, so join in if I miss anything. So some examples of classroom data is we're probably collecting teapot data, tippy toes, possibly class data, PQA or program quality assessment. So are there some others out there that programs are collecting that aren't underneath this classroom data section? No?
Chris?
Uh-huh.
This is Patty at Balswan.
Patty?
We collected this last, I guess, year, checkpoints on the TS Gold for each of the children. And so Mr. Bryan just recently did a, I guess you would call it an aggregation, I don't know, but we were able to see, we can go back and we can pull out, you know, individual children, children in the CPP program, however we want to look at it overall for professional development or what is needed from that.
Absolutely. That's a great one. And I did kind of list gold underneath the individual child data, but you're absolutely right. We're going to talk about how data can be transferred from one area to another to be in ways that we hadn't really looked at before. So as Patty was saying, under that individual child data section, we have things like ongoing assessment data, which would be core, gold. I think those are pretty much the two main ones that we're using in Colorado right now. I don't think anybody else is using any. Is there anybody else using another system other than the core or gold?
This is talking about how we're collecting data,
no? Okay.
how we're doing it.
So some of the other things that we might be looking at underneath individual child data is BIR data, or behavior incident reports, children's screenings and evaluations, child health information, so dentals, physicals, immunizations, vision screenings. We'd also be looking at individual child attendance, IEP goals. Anything else under individual child data that I've missed? Now remember, we're just talking right now about what we're collecting, and we're going to talk a little bit later about how we're going to use that information. Johanna? You can switch for me. So these are some things that we might be looking at under family data that were collected. So we might be looking at program surveys, so how families feel that we're doing. Training needs of families, wants of the group as a whole, of our families, also looking at their family goals and tracking those, looking at family history, family well-being. So family well-being might be things like, do we have homeless families? Do we have families of incarcerated spouses? Those kinds of things. So looking at that kind of information coming from our families. Also, sorry, Johanna, there you go. Programs, we'd be looking at benchmarks of quality, staff surveys, how are our staffs feeling, program self-assessment data, ratings such as ECHRs, ITERs, if you're a Head Start program, Head Start reviews, and board and council surveys. Okay, now you can switch. Community. There's lots of information to be gathered from the community. So you would be wanting to look at your community demographics such as population, education, income, unemployment rates, transportation issues, any special community circumstances. And what I mean by that is kind of that circumstance I brought up with incarcerated spouses. I know here in Fremont County that is a special community circumstance that we have to take into consideration since we have some prisons here in Fremont County. Also looking at wage studies and community perspective surveys. Okay, so now we're going to talk about what we do once we find out what we're collecting and seeing if we're collecting enough of the data that we need. So we're going to put that into the form of information. So putting the data together in an organized fashion. How do we do that? Are we making sure that we're collecting from all of the sources that we need to collect it from? And keeping in mind that the combining of all of this this data, is really what's going to give us that information. So how do we take all of this individual data and turn it into that information that we need to make knowledgeable decisions? So let's look back at our handout for data collection planning. And when we look at that, you're going to see 3 sections right there in the middle, which is when are we collecting the data, who's collecting it, and where are we storing this data. So these are 3 important questions that we really want to ask ourselves. Because if we're collecting data and we decide that we're going to make a plan about individual children, we want to make sure we're collecting in a timely manner so that we have a baseline. And so if that data is not collected until January, then we know we have a problem. We're not being able to get that baseline data collected. So we want to make sure we're looking at those 3 things. And are the right people collecting? Are we asking the right person to collect the right data? Okay, now you can switch. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at that knowledge base now. So once we get to the point that we know what we're collecting, we know who's collecting it, we know how we're putting it together, we get to this point of using that for our knowledge base so that the information gathered should give you the knowledge to make the decisions and planning in all directions and levels of the program. So this is really the place where when we get to this point, we have some things we want to think about. Because the knowledge base is going to be some different areas. We need to talk about who's going to be involved in that planning piece. Not just in planning the final outcome, but who's going to help in analyzing the data for us. Are we just gathering this information as a management group or as that leadership group and kind of tossing this information out to folks and saying, this is what we found out, and these are the goals we want to set. And so we want to make sure that we are getting those people involved in that analyzing process. And we kind of learned that through our leadership team here, as far as we were taking all of this data on classroom-wide practices such as teapots in class, and we were taking it and analyzing it, goal setting, and saying this is what we look at for the next year, when really we weren't involving those people such as the teachers and the families in that process of being a part of the goal setting. So really taking a look at who needs to be involved. And we want to get out of that process of saying things like, I think or I feel, and we want to get to this point where we're going to say, I know, and in these 3 different areas. So we're going to be using the data for individual child and family to plan for classroom-wide changes or practices, and also through program-wide.
Hey, Chris, this is Phil. Can I ask you a quick question?
Sure, Phil.
Have you had time to look at the relationship between class scores and teapot scores at an individual classroom level?
Let's see. We do. We have some different, there is some differences. And there's one handout that I can actually send out to everybody. Johanna, did I attach the professional development plan handout?
I don't think so, no. So if you send that to me, Chris, I could send it off to everybody.
Okay. So what I can do is I can send out that professional development plan handout, and on that piece it kind of breaks down the crosswalks, the difference between teapot and class. And is everybody familiar with class out there? Well, let's rephrase this. Is there anybody that is not familiar with class? Okay.
This is Margaret, probably not that familiar.
And this is Val. I'm not that familiar either.
Okay, well, class really is it's a classroom assessment tool that looks similar to the teapot. It's got some different crosswalk areas, so you're going to be looking at emotional development. You're also looking at some cognitive, what's the planning look like, and so it does crosswalk. And so Phil, thanks for bringing that up because it really is quite similar, and I'll get that handout out to everybody on what that looks like. But when we're looking at classroom-wide processes, those are really two of the main tools that we're going to be using. And classes used by the Office of Head Start is their tool for classroom assessment. So I'll get that out. Okay, Johanna. So when we're looking at individual child and family planning, we're now at the point where we have gathered information. We're really looking at have we gathered enough, and then we're at that planning process. So if we're looking at individual child and family and we're planning for each child, some of the things we might want to do with that data is joint goal setting between families and teachers, between special education staff. We might look at environmental change, activities, or embedded learning opportunities for kids within the classroom. And so we really have to look at now what information are we going to look at specifically. And I just wrote down some examples here, and this is where I'd kind of like to get some interaction and see if there's some other things that you guys are using for individual child planning. So some things that I thought we would consider would be attendance, health information, ongoing assessment data, BIR data, classroom assessment data. Anything else that anybody can think of? Okay. And then as we're looking for planning for the family, we might want to be doing family goal setting, looking at what trainings we're offering, looking at referrals that need to be made, and looking at the family strengths and how are we going to be doing strength sharing within peer-to-peer kind of relationships. So some of the information that we might want to look at during that process would be program surveys, demographics, goal information, and training surveys. And so all of that information can be used in that individualization piece of our program. Okay, Johanna? So at the classroom level, we're going to be using that information we gather for environmental changes. So looking at those TPOT scores, seeing is there anything we need to do around planning at each individual classroom stage. The teachers are going to be using that data for classroom-wide lesson planning. So this is where Patty was really talking and how GOLD can be used kind of across the board. And so we not only are going to use GOLD for this classroom-wide lesson planning where we're going to look at what does our class as a whole need, but it also fell into that individual planning section. So how are we going to plan for kids individually using that GOLD data? And when we get into the next section, you're going to see that GOLD is also something that crosswalks into the program level change. So looking at classrooms on a program-wide perspective using that same data. We'll also be looking at relationships. So how would we look at relationships through data? I know the TPOT really has a section that looks at the relationship between staff and class really, and also children, and class has a section that looks at the relationship between the child and the teacher and what the overall emotional feeling of the classroom is. So that's something that we can look at in our data. And then also looking at professional development and coaching for classroom staff. So we would be using things like that GOLD assessment and the classroom assessment, so the TPOT or the class, looking at family surveys, looking at your attendance in every classroom, BIR data, demographics data, and applying all of that information to plan at the classroom level. Johanna? So program-wide, we'll be using this as a leadership team, and some things that you'd want to look at is your goal setting and program vision, using all of that information. Also staff and family satisfaction. Are we looking at our surveys and tracking them and seeing how we're doing? Looking at professional development as a whole in our training plans. So using the gold data, using the teapot data, the class data, all of that information to drive our training plans and our professional development. Also look at it budget and planning and grant writing. Do we need to reallocate some funds? So are we seeing in our gold data that a trend of over a couple of years or a couple of semesters of low areas in mathematics or in science? And how do we reallocate some funds to be able to add into that budget planning to help with those assessment scores, bring up those areas? Looking at curriculum modifications, do we need to make big changes? Is the curriculum that we're currently using showing in our data to be useful and to be meeting our goals? And I know the big push right now with Head Start specifically is school readiness goals. So setting some school readiness goals for our kids, and are we meeting that, and is our curriculum matching it? So we're able to see through that data if we're meeting curriculum goals. Do we need to order more materials? Do we also looking at program operation through our program calendar and staffing patterns? So some of the information to consider when you're looking at that is demographics, surveys, classroom assessments, and child assessments. Okay. So when we get to this point, and we're going to look back at, if you look back at your handout again with the data collection plan, we've really gone through and assessed everything that we're doing with our data. We know what data collecting, when we're collecting it, who's going to collect it, where are we storing it, and now what is that information used for. So we've got through that entire piece. Now we want to say, how are we going to share this data? And who are we going to share it with? So are we sharing it with boards and councils, with funders, with our staff, with the community? And with each one of these, it's going to be a different way of sharing. It's going to look different if we're sharing with the boards and council than if we're sharing with just our staff or our funders or the community. So there's some different ways where you can collect your data to be able to put it together that keeps it simple, lets people look at it quickly, and then also it's very important to summarize. We want to be able to let people look at it quickly, especially when we're talking about boards and councils. They're not going to want to go through each and every one of our graphs or look at individual child data. They want a quick snapshot. So Joanne, this is here's the professional development plan, Phil. So I attached it to this. If you look at this professional development plan, this is just one way of collecting your data from your teapot and your class to be able to share that information with your staff member that is being assessed. And also, we use this for sharing with the staff member's coach. So I don't know, can everybody see that? Is it? So basically at the top you're seeing that you're setting a professional goal, and then we have a section there on the left-hand side that says it's the summary or description. So we're pulling information off of that teapot, off of that class, and breaking it into 3 different areas, which is the strengths, emerging skills, and then if there's any professional development needs are being summarized onto this first sheet. And then page 2 really gets into the goal setting section. So it breaks down each area of the teapot, and it also adds how it's going to crosswalk with the class. So as you can see, for an example, under environment, it has Teapot, which is areas 1 through 7. Also crosswalks with class instructional learning formats. And you don't have to set it up that way if you're not using the class. You could just use the Teapot section. In our case with Head Start, we use both assessments in the classroom. So in that area, you would be able to jointly plan with your staff member on what areas they want to target based on the strengths, emerging skills, and professional development needs, and set a goal within those areas. We don't set a goal in every single area. We start off with 1 or 2, and as they meet the goals throughout the year, then we include more goals. And there on the bottom, which would be the 3rd page of this, is the action plan, which is a piece that the coach and the teacher really work together to be able to to take that goal and talk about what are the next steps, who's going to do it, date initiated, and the date completed. So instead of having to look at those individual class and Teapot scores, it just really is a quick way to summarize and then to get the information and get to the planning stage. Okay, Johanna? This is one example of how you can present information to your staff or to your coaches or your leadership team on Teapots. So this is just takes 2 different areas of the Teapot, schedules and routines, and the supportive conversations area. And these are just made-up scores with some made-up classrooms. So you're looking at each individual classroom and how they did in that schedules and routines area, and then also how it totals at the end. Typically with this data, this is more data that I share with management, and I'll show you an example of how we break this down to share it, information with the board and with our overall staff. Hey, Johanna. So this is how we would share it with program level data. So we take that data from individual classrooms and each individual breakdown with environment, schedules, and routines, and do an average. And then this is going to show us how we're doing program-wide. So as you can see, there's pre-scores and post-scores, and you're able to determine quickly at a glance what we need to do as far as making a training plan, planning for mini trainings, or planning for our coaches and what they need to do. Okay. I know this is a little bit hard to see, but this is an example of how we collect BIR data. And I know that there is now a program that's going to be available soon that will collect BIR data, which is web-based, but this is a simple way to be able to do it if you're not purchasing that web-based program. So on the left, you can see it breaks down your BIR areas, so looking at where this happened, what was the behavior, and then it graphs it on the right. And this is not the complete form, it's just an example. I have all of these forms available, and I'll give you my email at the end of this webinar if you're interested in using any of these formats. So with this BIR data, you can track it both by individual child. So you would be plugging in the data for the individual child, and you could do planning for behavior support, and also environmental changes, those kinds of things based on the individual data. And then this data transfers into classroom data, so the compiling of all of the individual data into a classroom, so you can see trends within the classroom to see if maybe there's a certain time of day where things are happening and you need to do some additional training or some additional environmental changes. And then that data in turn transfers over to program-wide data, so we can look at it as a whole to see if we see any trends for behavior or for professional development training as an entire center that we might need to do. And I'm sure if anybody that uses GOLD is familiar with this. This is the example of the individual child data form. It's the class profile from the GOLD piece. So this has been very useful. It really breaks the information down by what's the grade of your children you're looking at, are they falling within the expected color band levels, and so it gives you a quick shot of your entire classroom. So you're able to use this for individual child planning, also at classroom level planning, to plan for your whole group, and then you can also compile these at the end of each checkpoint and use it in conjunction with some of those other reports they use on GOLD to do some program planning, as Patty was talking about. So using it for some professional development, ordering of materials, those kinds of things that you may need to do. So taking all of that, those are lots of graphs, lots of information. We found it very useful to summarize when we're going to report out to a bigger group. So if you can turn to handout 2, which Johanna has sent out to you, this is just an example of an outcome summary. So it really takes all of your data, the aggregation of your data. And we found that it's important because sometimes board members change, or they're not too familiar with early childhood, or if you're reporting to community agencies, you want to really tell them what you're reporting on. So just giving a brief summary of what the tool looks like, and then breaking down what you found by analyzing your data. So page 2 of that handout really is breaking it down into, and this is our GOLD, or this is an example of GOLD data aggregation. So looking at all those areas based on fall, winter, and spring gives you the quick numbers table to look at, so you can look at each area, and then also the graph format. And so the next piece of that is looking at the child assessment, or the class assessment data. So it looks at the TPOT, or class scores first. So we're looking at class, and again, it summarizes what is class and how do we use it. And then it also summarizes our findings for it based upon classroom and the 3 different domain areas. Lastly on that is a plan of action. So being able to take everything that you found and analyzed and turn it into a plan of action. What are we going to do next? So it just gives you a quick way to be able to report this out.
Yeah.
Okay, Johanna. So just to summarize what we had talked about, that data really is about that cycle of being able to have a goal in mind and setting those goals, planning and implementation, and then collecting your data, analyzing it, and then reporting and determining priorities for improvement. And it just becomes that constant cycle piece. All right. Ooh, I know that was pretty quick. They told me I had a half hour to talk. So is there any questions?
Yes, I have a question. Chris, do you have a crosswalk of the class scores and the TPOTs?
I do have a crosswalk that I can maybe get out to Johanna, and then I can email it, and Johanna can email it out to you guys. Is that possible, Johanna?
Yes, that's definitely possible. I'm making a list right now.
Okay, thank you. That'd be great.
Any other questions? Do we have any other ways that people are summarizing their data to report out? Is there anybody right now that's using summary reports?
We have Chris.
Yes.
Hey, this is Ben. First of all, we really liked your TPOT summary sheet and how you mix the class and those things together. And we use the TPOTs when we're making the professional development plans, to focus on like a specific indicator and then break that into pieces and then collect data on, are the teachers using each of those specific skills, to meet that one indicator.
Oh, nice. So you're breaking it down even further to to track kind of the pieces that they need to work on within that indicator, and then how they're making progress.
Right. So, like for how you make goals for children, they did this 3 times within an hour or whatever, but we do the same thing but for the teacher. So as coaches, we come and observe and make sure that they're doing the piece at least so many times an hour or so many times a day or whatever they need. So, thanks.
Very nice. Any other questions or things you'd like to share with us?
Hey, this is Phil again.
Hi, Phil.
So how do you deal at a management level? I mean, individually or as a team, with information that's discrepant from one another? Because occasionally that's going to happen, I assume.
Information that would be discrepant from one another. Can you give me an example?
Yeah. Somebody has a great teapot score and a lousy or mediocre score on the class.
Okay, I see what you're saying. So really what we're doing is just basically talking to coaches and having coaches go in and take a look or a second look. And then we're doing a kind of a breakdown. It's like a mini assessment. So if we see that a certain area in a teapot maybe is really low, but during the class it has come up as an average, then in between pre and post, we would take just that one little section of the teapot and go back in and do a mini kind of reassessment in that area to look at. And then it's about dialogue also between the teacher and the coach and supervisors and kind of what's going on. Now, we have seen some situations where there's some discrepancies in, well, I don't know if it would necessarily be a discrepancy, but we've seen some situations where we have a really either like low teapot score where we would expect, if you're looking at program data overall, that you're probably going to see some lower progress made with children on gold, and seeing that happen, which has been odd. So taking that and looking at the 2 different areas, and then you have to dig further, look for more information. Where did kids start? So it's really digging into your data. And looking at all those different areas. I don't know if that made sense. How would you deal with it, Phil?
Well, I don't know off the top of my head. I've just kind of had a variety of different experiences where, and if you take a lot of information and you pay attention to it, it doesn't always tell the same story. I don't know if I have any hard and fast rules other than it's probably an occasion to take more data if you're getting some sort of discrepancy that maybe just doesn't pass the spell test. It shouldn't be discrepant, but it is.
Right.
So
using that snapshot piece, I think, especially with the teapot, is really kind of helpful in going back and taking a couple other looks at that area, or having somebody, if you have some reliability raters within your program, having a couple of people taking a look at that same section or area.
Yeah, that makes good sense. Thanks. I appreciate your thoughts on that.
Any other questions out there? Okay.
Chris, this is Johanna, and I think your presentation was fabulous, first of all. And second of all, one of the things that we're trying to recommend and encourage at Pyramid Plus is that any programs or communities that are collecting this amount of data, we really do recommend having a data coordinator, so a point person that's kind of orchestrating the collection as well as the reporting out. So that's, I'm wondering, Chris, if you can share kind of how your role has worked at Fremont Head Start in that position.
I'm laughing only because I'm the only person that actually likes data here at
I know.
Start. So, no, but Johanna's right. It really does come down to having somebody be the lead on that and guiding the process of data collection. That's how we really came to the data collection plan, because you really get to the point sometimes that you've got a lot of different people collecting a lot of different things, and are we collecting just for the sake of collecting? Is it just something that you're going to collect and it's going to get stuffed in the back of a file cabinet just because we thought it was good information? So by having a key point person, it really streamlines that process for you. So you're able to have somebody take lead on this data collection plan, look at, is the information we're collecting even useful? Do we need it? Do we need to collect more information? How can we bring it all together into that information funnel, and how do we get it distributed back out to people so that it makes sense to everybody and is meaningful to each component? So it's really been helpful here for me to collect both classroom assessment data, individual child data, and then being able to work with the different key managers within our program to say, what are you collecting and how else can we use that data? And then bringing it together, summarizing. So it really is helpful to have that one lead person in place.
Great, thank you. So I just wanted to remind everyone that our next program and community-wide webinar will be on Monday, March 11th at 3:30 to 4:30, and it will be hosted by Belle Swan's Children's Center, and focusing around hosting effective tours and community outreach. And Chris, I want to thank you very much for a well-done presentation, and any final notes that you may have.
I don't. Thank you guys very much.